For the Greeks and Romans, the Egyptians were Africans, and when you get depictions of Egyptians, they're always shown people with black skin, afro hair, sort of small noses, broad faces, full mouths. So they actually sort of have a caricature almost of what they see as an Egyptian. And the Greeks often confused Egypt with Ethiopia, so they'll quite often call the Egyptians Ethiopians. So obviously somebody with a dark face. And when they showed Ethiopians, they showed them in exactly the same way that they showed Egyptians as Africans. So there was no question at all that Egypt was an African country. It certainly wasn't seen to be European by either the Greeks or the Romans.
When the last of the Nubian kings, Tawentameni, fought his last conflict with Ashurbanipal, who was the Assyrian king in 664 BCE.
After this, there are no more black rulers of Egypt. The rulers are now Assyrians or Assyrian puppets.
And essentially the northern part of Kemet became part of the culture and history and civilization of Assyria. Assyria became the focal point, the married line, the feminine line, the female line of Kemet was deliberately usurped by the Assyrian kings.
And therefore Shepenupet II was the last independent black ruler of Egypt. Then Egypt is conquered by the Persians in 525 BC.
The Persian kings, like Cambyses, a ruthless and genocidal ruler who took over Persian rulership and then took over rulership in Kemet. This Cambyses attempted to invade Nubia and failed. His army died in the Nubian desert. That which was left was destroyed by the Nubian bows. If you don't know, then you should know that the Nubians were famous for having the longbow. Even before the 14th century Englishman said he created the longbow. I don't know how he came out with creating the English longbow. The longbow was the famous weapon of choice for the Nubian, the Kushite warriors.
Then it's conquered by the Greeks in 332 BC.
Then, of course, after the Battle of Gargamella, in 323 or 325 BCE, Alexander the Great, a Greek, a Macedonian, defeated Darius III. In defeating Darius III, Alexander the Great then became a pharaoh of Egypt.
He took charge of Egypt, which is what we get the name from the ancient Greeks. That's what they called the country.
So the Egyptian world becomes part then of the Greek world.
And following his death, when his kingdom, which was so big it had to be divided up amongst his generals, a general called Ptolemy took charge of Egypt, and initially as a satrap, as an official who was ruling there, and then later as a king.
The Macedonian rulerships, Ptolemy, etc., he was a Macedonian Greek general, married into the Egyptian bloodline. Married into the female Egyptian bloodline, producing Egyptians who are Greek and Egyptian at the same time and facing towards Greece.
And he founded really the last resident dynasty of pharaohs.
So then Egypt then became even more divorced. And then, of course, there is the classic story. Whether or not there is historical accuracy to it is another matter, although we do have references to it, of Alexander's attempt to invade Nubia and the Candace Amerinus with elephants and warriors preventing him from invading Nubia. We have that recorded under several Greek scholars. The Macedonian rulers of Egypt did not conquer Nubia. Nubia remained essentially intact.
The Greeks had had a lot of contact with Kemet, and they saw Kemet as a place where they would go to learn. So many of the famous Greek philosophers, mathematicians, scientists, playwrights, all went to Egypt to actually learn from the Egyptian priests.
The Greek rulership did not affect the religious systems in the same way that Christianity and Islam did.
The Romans started to interfere with Egypt about 100 BC. And that was because this Ptolemaic dynasty, the dynasty Cleopatra was the last ruler of that dynasty, had started to have a lot of dynastic feuds. So brothers and sisters had been sort of arguing and vying for the throne. One person would be exiled, somebody else would take control. And the Romans were starting to become increasingly powerful, and quite often the ruler who'd been exiled would actually run to the Romans and ask them to put them back on the throne.
Then it's conquered by the Romans in 30 BC. Meroe has a whole series of pyramids in a very good state of preservation. There are at least 84 pyramids, and it's quite possible that many more have since been found.
I'm standing here at the pyramid complex of Meroe. Here in Sudan, there are over 200 pyramids that have been found here to date. This is almost twice as many as its neighbor in Egypt. These pyramids were built by the Nubians, and this is just one of the complexes that can be seen here today.
Iron, the center of that industry, was of course Meroe.
Meroe is already a city, a royal city, when the capital is further north at Napata.
The royal city of Meroe is very important to our understanding of the achievements of the Kushites because it was actually a planned city. It was planned, it had a water sanctuary, which are known as the baths, it had temples, and it also had spacious homes on the scale of aristocrats.
Today at this ancient site of Meroe, we can see the most amazing arrangement of pyramids. Here, like in other parts of the Nile Valley, it's still debated whether the pyramids were used just for burials or if they were astrological markers and places for holy rituals.
The city of Meroe dates back to about the 10th century BC, although this is controversial. If one looks at some of the older writers writing in the 19th century, they argue that Meroe is so old that it even predates ancient Egypt.